here's what we're going to learn by the end of the day. I know a lot of people with birthdays in the summer, and so I thought a birthday card would be appropriate. Even if it's your birthday, you can still write yourself a card, and it feels good. Francesca, hello. Thanks for tuning in. If you don't, if you don't know who I am, my name is Kevin Bretting, and I'm the fitness coordinator for Campus Recreation, and I'm a part of the Wellness Center. And so that in no way qualifies me to teach you how to do calligraphy, but it's been a hobby of mine for a long time. And if you really dive into this, you'll probably find some things that I told you that might not be completely accurate, but you know, that's the way learning from a non-professional goes. So for materials, if you have some graph paper like so, that would be great. If you don't have graph paper, we can make do without. And if you have a protractor, even better. And then for writing utensil, all you need is a pencil, and we'll just go from there. I have a fancy utensil. This is a calligraphy oblique pen holder with a nib in there. And this is a new nib, actually. It has this ink well, this spring inside of the nib, and that holds a lot more ink. So I'm going to get more, more writing done per dip of my pen. So that's cool. And the ink that I'm using, it happens to be just watercolor. I forget the name. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's gouache or gouache, Gouche, I think. But I had some watercolor and I mixed up a color and it turned out okay. So, but there's all kinds of inks out there and there's all kinds of nibs, and I'm honestly not the expert on those at all. I'm just starting to explore some more of those things, but this is what I'll be using, and that gives me the thin and thick lines that you can see. And right now my ink's not flowing, but if I apply pressure, my nib splays, and that's how I make a thick stroke. So if I kind of get the ink to flow again, a thin stroke does not have very much pressure, and when I start to apply pressure, it becomes thicker. And that's the really cool visual, aesthetic appeal of using a nib with that variable tip. And this is a pointed nib as opposed to a broad tipped nib, and that has a different look. But I think that covers most of all. Let's find yourself an empty sheet of graph paper, and let's start to line it up. And I'm going to refer to this reference alphabet that I made for one of my earlier classes. So right now, if you can find a 54-degree angle and make some guidelines on your page, and just go all the way across with those guidelines, and then I'll go ahead and do that as well. And we'll talk about letters and practice strokes. And a really easy way to make these guidelines, once I have one line made, I just take a ruler and I line it up on one edge, and then I parallel it on the other side. And our project today will not need guidelines, but it helps to practice. And I'm going to try to get as much foundational practice in with our project in mind as we can fit into an hour or so. Okay, so my grid lines are made, and then I'm going to go back to this reference alphabet and say, for the purpose of practice, I'm going to jump over right away, and we're going to do some of these foundational strokes, and then we'll start to bring those in to a real letter form. So our first foundational stroke is going to be a small up thin stroke. Just it covers an X height, which is a square's height, and that's going to be the height of your lowercase letters. Do a bunch of those. And Josie, I know, is practicing left-handed. Are you using your calligraphy tools, Josie?
Only my pencil.
Okay. Good to know.
Yes. I did buy some markers that are like they have felt tips or something like that, or brush tip markers, I guess. I'm
Brush
gonna try
tip, yep.
that. We'll
Yep.
see if that works.
Not a bad choice. Okay, so those are really thin. I know you might not be able to see them very well, but that's a short practice stroke. Now let's make some ovals. We're going to keep our slant, and by the way, I didn't mention this, but by the time we get to the top of our upstroke, Lindy, be quiet. She scared me. I want to be aiming for that 45 or 54 degree angle at the top of that. So when I make my oval, I'm going to try to line up the left side of my oval with that 54 degree incline. So make a bunch of those. Again, the X height is how tall these ovals or these O's are going to be. But think of them more like an oval right now. Okay. I'm going to make our ovals bigger now. So instead of just an X height, I'm going to make my ovals cover 3 squares. And it doesn't matter if you line up where you start with where you finish. I'm looking more for the general aesthetic shape of that left side being 54 degree angles down with a bigger movement. And they don't all have to be the same, but we're just trying to warm up some of these larger round shapes. Let's take it below our baseline. So instead of going up and into something, let's start by going down. And we can just follow that across on your page and make an oval with our downward pressure, the highlighted point. Does that make sense? So my right side, in this case, for my writing utensil, I'm applying pressure on the right side of my oval. Hi, Sunil. I just noticed you. You can use a pencil and graph paper if you have it. Otherwise, whatever paper you have, we have a 54 degree angle as our guideline, and we're achieving that italic slant based on that guideline. We're making circles, ovals.
Okay.
I'm going to do a few more of these. Okay, just a few more foundational shapes. I'm going to change our intention. I'm going to make the equivalent of an L, where let's say if this is the bottom of my X height where I'm going to start a little bit above it and go up to the top and finish like that. My pressure is on the left side, and that's where I'm putting my parallel emphasis. I'm trying to achieve that 54 degree slant on the left side of my shape. Okay, and then we'll do a few with the idea of making a J. So now the bottom part of my stroke, say this is the top of my X height. I'm going to parallel and then swoop to the left to come back up. And I'm going to go ahead and finish up to the top of that. Angle down, and then tie that off. Okay, do a few more of those, and then we'll regroup and start to make some letters. We'll start to write the word happy.
So Kevin, this pen you are using, it's an ink pen?
This is dipped in ink, yes, Sunil. So
Okay,
I'll show you a close-up here I did earlier, but I have an ink well. This is blue watercolor ink.
right.
And I have this spring that holds more ink per dip.
Okay.
This is the first nib of this kind that I have. Most of my nibs are just normal, meaning that they don't have this extra ink well, and then you have to dip fairly frequently, but that's okay. But you can do what we're doing with a pencil for now. And if you really get into it, I'll try to give you some references, some resources. Okay,
Yeah,
ready
sure.
to
Thanks.
start writing the word happy. So here's our H, and our H starts off complicated, but I'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll practice it a bunch. That's our general shape, and then we tie it off with that flourish on the back end of it. So let me break that down a little bit. I'm going to give myself 3 squares as the height of my H, and my first stroke starts at the top, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it starts to curve left a little bit, and it bisects to come around, back up to the top, and then it comes down and finishes like that. Let's just do that, and then we'll add the serif as a separate step. So you start at the top, around and bisect the middle, up to the top again with another downstroke. I'm going to write 2 more of them. If you want to watch any of them, great. If you want to just practice them, great. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my first one and start where I started as a separate stroke and make a small loop, and then I come around about to the top and then make that curve about an equal left side to the bottom loop. And I'm just going to do that on each one of those. And so that's our that's our H, which is kind of fancy. Give me a look when you're ready to move on. Okay, doing okay. So on to an A. If you recall our foundational oval, our small one, that's what we're going to do. And then I add the right side of it to make an A. Just do a bunch of those. I'm going to do 4 more. It's 2 separate strokes. Make the oval first, and then make the right side of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a protractor, but it'll work, I guess.
Mine is an angle.
Oh, that's good for that then.
Can you see that okay? And my camera, I noticed, kind of zooms in and out. It tries to autofocus frequently, but
It's hard.
and we'll get more practice as we tie in the whole project. So I'm gonna keep going on to our P's. Let's say this is my X height, or that's the height of my letter. I'm gonna start my P a little bit higher on this particular case and cover 3 squares high. That's its own stroke, and then I make that finish. And you can attach that stroke to the descending stroke, but in this case, I want to loop it around a little bit. There's 2 separate strokes. One establishes the downstroke, and then you come back up to the bottom of the X height, like that. Okay, then we'll make a few Y's. Y's are kind of fun. I'm going to start with my entry stroke. If you remember, it approaches the top of the X height, and then I'm going to curve it back down and then back up. So that's the beginning of it. And then I start at the top and draw that J finish, like so. Entry stroke, down to the bottom of the X height. I make that little, I'm not sure what to call that. It's a foundational stroke, but I forget what it's called. And a separate stroke is to do the bottom of the Y. I'm going to do 3 more of them. Okay, we doing okay? Okay to move on to another big fancy letter in the form of a B. I know I'm getting to the bottom of my page here, but you can still see well enough, I hope. So for my B, I'm going to have an eye of 3 squares high, start at the top, And this time I'm going to loop all the way back around, come below the bottom of the X height, and finish in the middle, or kind of on the left side of the middle for that B. So this is one continuous stroke. Start at the top, go down, loop big and to the left. Okay, and watch as many times as you need. I'm going to do 3 or 4 more of them. And I want this to feel like the left side takes up more space than the right side. So that big swoop around to the left with a fairly small first bump of the B, and then the bottom bump gets a little bigger, but it's still not as large as the left side. Okay, we'll get to practice more of those as we go as well. I'm going to move on to our I. It has an upstroke and then a small curl to complete the I. That's all it is. And I'll go ahead and dot it so it looks more like an I. It's a thin, you might not be able to see it very much with my blue ink, but a thin upstroke and basically a U shape that swoops out from under it. And I'm out of paper, so I'm just going to leave that where it is and start to line a new page. Okay, ready to move on? So R, going right into an R. I'm going to take my upstroke above the baseline or above the top of my X height and then loop back around, pause for a second, and then finish. I go up to the top, above it, make a small left-hand loop, pause, and then come back. And again, I know, can you see my entry stroke? Or is it too faint? It's okay.
Yeah.
I know it's really faint, but Okay, I'm gonna go to a T. I have an entry stroke to my T, which covers the height of my X height. And then I'm gonna start a second square up and make a downstroke and finish like that. So just like an I, just a little bit taller. And of course, we'll cross that, but in the project, we will not cross it. You'll see what that looks like. Okay, I'm gonna go into our H. I'm gonna start with another entry stroke. And when I finish, I'm gonna lift my pen and start again. And I go up 2 strokes high, or 2 squares high. And when I get to the top, I come back down and finish at the bottom. So that's a 2-stroke thing. And then my third stroke is just like the start of the Y to make our H. Entry stroke, pause, start where you finished, come down to the bottom, and then make that third stroke to complete the H. I'm going to do that one more time. Okay, going on to a D. I still have an entry stroke here. I'm going to make my foundational small oval like I did for my A, and just stop right there. And then start 3 squares above it for my descending stroke and finish that. Foundational oval. Start at the top, and I'm going to aim for that right-hand side. Okay. I'm going to write 3 more of them. And I'm using those grid lines the whole time, and now that I have some text on here, you know, ideally it has that same consistent italic slant, and that's where our guidelines help a lot. We'll go to an A we've already done, so let's skip. We've done our Y already. Let's practice this though, because this will come into play at the end of our project, but let's go ahead and practice it a little bit early. If I make a Y, I'm gonna flourish it this time. So watch what I do with my flourish. I'm gonna come down with a longer descender and loop back around. And let's just do that. That's all I wanna do for now. It's a longer descender. I don't care how far down you go. But when you come back through, it's going to start to curve to the left as it reaches its finish. One more of those. And I'll say this too, as you're practicing that stroke, when we get into these longer strokes where our pen stays on the page for a longer period of time and we're starting to make these bigger swoops and swirls. If you can start to release the pressure on your hand on the table and make it more of a whole arm movement as you start to draw these circles, that'll help a lot. I have a glove that I have cut the fingers off of. One, it helps me slide a little easier, and two, it prevents the oils from my skin from getting on the page underneath me where I might be including text as I go. But I start to move my whole arm instead of just my fingers, and that'll create these smooth, fluid loops and shapes that we're trying to go for. But let's go ahead and start to write the whole word, the whole project. It'll look a little messy on the first couple, but that's okay, and we'll get better as we go. So we're going to start with our H. And I'm going to go ahead and add that left-hand serif right now. And then for our A, I'm going to start a little bit separate. I'm not going to attach my A to this upstroke. I easily could, but for this point, I'm going to move a little bit to the right and have that be its own thing. And now pause when you're there. I want to make sure you watch the next piece. So I'm going to attach the downstroke of my P and have it become the base of my B. So I'm going to start a little bit above my X height, go down quite a bit, and then loop that big around to the left. And there I've formed my B. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to go back up to the top and finish my two P's. On the second P, I'm going to aim my downstroke such that it's a little shorter than usual, and it's just going to finish right where it is. I'm going to start to make my Y, but that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm just going to leave it like that because I need to use the tail of my Y to attach into the rest of the word birthday. Okay, everybody with me so far? So I'm going to go down to my B at this point, and I'm going to look for wherever my downstroke finished, that's where I'm going to start my I. And I'm going to write IR and my T, and I'm going to finish right there. Okay, so here's the fun part. I'm going to create this downstroke for my Y. It's going to curve to the left towards the middle of my B, and then kind of loop up and around my R, cross my T, and go right up into my H. So watch what that looks like. Okay. And so depending on a lot of things, everyone's going to look a little bit different. You might need to make your T a little bit higher, or you might need to, aim a little better in order to cross it at a height that you want. But that's the general gist that we're going for. Go ahead and cross or dot my I if I want. And then let's finish our D-A-Y. I am going to attach my D to that upstroke from my H. And on the descender for my D, I want it to be higher of a starting spot than my T. So I'm going to go, 3 squares high, aim for that right-hand side of it. And there I have that nice discrepancy from the T to the D. attach my A to the upstroke of my D. And I'll pause right there and wait for everyone, and we'll do a big flourish with our Y. Okay, so here's my Y. It's going to look like this, but I'm going to continue with it as I go. Okay. That one turned out okay for me. So far so good. Remember to try to keep a large arm movement that'll smooth out your lines. But you go down, back up to the top. You kind of bisect, maybe a little bit lower than bisect that first loop. And then you make another opposite direction loop and then finish in the middle. And we'll do that over and over for the next 15 or 20 minutes. That whole word, we'll just practice and repeat. Okay, are we ready? I'm going to stick to my guidelines for now, and then after this second attempt with guidelines, I'll go ahead and freehand it without guidelines and see how it goes. But from the top, from our H, I'm going to make my first downstroke, bisect the middle, loop around. I might take a little more creative liberty and go a little bit deeper in that, just for fun. My serif at the top. I'm going to make my A without an upstroke on this. And then we have to remember to plan for our B. So on the top of my P is going to go right into a large left-hand circle. Now I can finish my P. My second P is going to be short, and it's going to come to a point. I'm going to create half of my Y and then stop. And then I'm going to go back down below to where my B is and start my IRT. I'm going to make my T this time just a little bit higher. Preparation for that finishing Y stroke. But that's all I do. And then I'm going to go back up to my Y and just say something if I'm going too fast. I'm going to aim to come through my T, the large upswing, and then come back down on top of that upstroke for my H. Attach my H to my D. Remember to make the downstroke for my D higher than my T. And then here's my large flourish on my Y. Down for a while, start to curve to the left, curve to the right, and come through that loop. And of course, I can dot my I. But if you notice, the guidelines are really helping me stay parallel. All of my downstrokes are parallel to each other, and especially when you have the thick versus thin that you can get with fancy tools, that becomes apparent. My Y deviates from that a little bit, so it's not quite as consistent as I'd like to be, but overall, it looks pretty good. I'm going to keep going. You all are doing great. I'm going to switch to a blank page. And this can be a free-form idea.